When the first bulldozer touched my land, I thought it was some sort of mistake. I remember standing by the old fence my father and I had built with our own hands, watching the machine tear through the grass and soil like it had every right to be there. The sound of metal against dirt, the shouts of workers, the roar of engines, it all felt unreal. My name is David Carson, and for most of my life, that land was my peace, my inheritance, and my promise to my father that I would never let it go. What I didn't know was that a homeowners association, the Maple Ridge Estates HOA, had decided to steal it from right under my nose. It began quietly, like most betrayals do. Surveyor flags appeared one morning near the edge of my property. Orange ribbons fluttered in the wind, cutting across my pasture in neat, unnatural lines. I thought maybe the county was laying out new utility lines, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But within a week, strange trucks started showing up. Big white ones with company logos I didn't recognize. They parked on the road and sent men out with clipboards, drones, and cameras. I walked over one morning and asked what they were doing. One of them barely looked up and said, "Just checking boundaries for Maple Ridge Phase 3. I frowned. Phase 3? Maple Ridge was the new development about a mile away, the one with uniform lawns and mailbox rules. I told the man he must be mistaken. My land wasn't part of any development. He smiled politely, the kind of smile you give someone you think doesn't matter, and said, "You might want to check with the HOA, sir." Then he turned away. That was the first time I ever heard the name Richard Hill. He was the president of the Maple Ridge HOA, a man who carried himself like every inch of land within 10 miles belonged to him. I drove to their office that afternoon, a sterile little building next to a coffee shop, and told the receptionist I needed to speak to whoever was in charge. She pointed me to a glass-walled room where Richard sat, a man in his 50s with perfect hair and a smirk that looked permanent. "Mr. Carson," he said after I explained who I was, "we appreciate your concern, but according to our records, the area in question is part of Maple Ridge's upcoming expansion." "That can't be right," I said, laying my father's old deed on his desk. "This has been in my family since 1974. I know exactly where my boundaries are." He barely glanced at it. "Boundaries can be complicated," he said, his tone calm but dismissive. "If you have an issue, I suggest you take it up with the county. We've already received all necessary approvals." That was the end of the meeting. He stood up, shook my hand like it was already over, and walked me out the door. I did go to the county. I spent weeks shuffling between departments, waiting in lines, and explaining my story to board clerks. Finally, one older woman pulled my file and frowned. "Looks like there was a mapping overlap when Maple Ridge filed their plans," she said. "Part of your parcel got lumped into the development zone. It's probably just a clerical error." "Then fix it," I said. She sighed. "I can file a correction, but the permits have already been approved. Construction's likely to start soon." I left that office with a pit in my stomach. By the time I got home, the sound of machinery was already echoing across my field. They were cutting down trees. My trees. I tried to fight it. I called lawyers, sent letters, even tried blocking the access road once, but the sheriff showed up and warned me to leave the workers alone. My lawyer at the time said we could file for an injunction, but those cases took months, sometimes years. Meanwhile, the HOA had money, connections, and speed on their side. In 3 months, they had built 30 houses. In 6 months, 50. Every morning, I woke to the sound of construction. Every night, I went to bed staring out at the glow of street lights they installed on my soil. I felt humiliated, helpless, like my father's legacy was being ripped apart one cement truck at a time. People told me to go public, to raise hell, to fight harder. But every time I looked at that land, I remembered what my father used to say. "Patience, son. Never interrupt a man when he's building his own downfall." So I waited. I let them build. 2 years passed. 96 homes stood proudly where my fields used to be. Neat rows of driveways, mailboxes, and playgrounds. Families moved in. They waved at me as they jogged past. I waved back. None of them had any idea that the ground under their homes still legally belonged to me. I paid the property tax every year, just like always, because no one had ever transferred the deed. Then one afternoon, I got a phone call. "Mr. Carson," said a voice I recognized immediately, Richard Hill, "I'd like to discuss your cooperation in this matter. We're wrapping up Phase 3, and frankly, you've been very reasonable throughout this process. The board would like to offer you compensation. $50,000 should cover any inconvenience you've experienced." I laughed, genuinely laughed for the first time in years. $50,000, I repeated. For 15 acres? "Let's be realistic," he said smoothly. "The homes are built. The community's thriving. It's done. This is just a formality." "Sure," I said. "Let's make it formal then." And I hung up. That night I called a new lawyer, a young woman named Amanda Price, who'd built a reputation on property law cases no one else wanted to touch. I showed her everything: the deed, the maps, the tax receipts, even pictures of the construction. She spent days combing through county records, zoning files, and court documents. Finally, she looked up from her laptop one evening and said, "David, they never filed a deed transfer. They built on your land, but ownership never changed hands." "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said slowly, "every house, every sidewalk, every square inch of that subdivision sits on property that still belongs to you." The air left my lungs. All the anger, the frustration, the hopelessness, it all melted into one cold, steady feeling: vindication. We filed a quiet title action. The HOA didn't even respond at first. They thought it was another nuisance complaint, something they could crush with a few letters from their attorneys. But when Amanda presented our evidence, my original deed, the tax payments, the county's admission of error, the tone changed instantly. Suddenly, they wanted meetings, negotiations, settlements. Amanda refused them all. "We'll see you in court," she said. When the day came, the courtroom was packed. The Maple Ridge lawyers looked confident at first, but that confidence drained away as the judge read through the evidence. Every record proved the same thing. My family's ownership had never been broken. The HOA had spent millions building homes on land they didn't own. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and held up the deed my father had signed decades ago. "Your Honor," I said, "for 2 years I watched them build on my property. I tried to stop it, but no one listened. I didn't want revenge, I just wanted justice." The room was silent. The judge turned to the HOA's table and asked if they had anything to say. Richard Hill was there, red-faced and sweating, but he said nothing. The ruling came swiftly. The land was mine. Every inch of Phase 3 of Maple Ridge Estates was to be considered unlawfully constructed on private property. The judge gave them 2 choices: purchase the land from me at full market value, including damages and interest, or vacate it entirely. The number Amanda presented was staggering: $12.4 million. Richard nearly choked when he heard it. The HOA board scrambled, argued, begged for reductions, but in the end, they had no choice. They paid. When the payment cleared, Amanda called me with a smile in her voice. "You're officially the most expensive lesson the Maple Ridge HOA has ever learned." I drove through the neighborhood a few days later. The homes were perfect. Identical lawns, identical fences, identical mailboxes. Families were outside washing cars, walking dogs, living their lives. Most of them had no idea what had happened. I didn't blame them. They were innocent. It wasn't their fault their HOA had built their homes on stolen land. As I passed the playground, I stopped by the old oak tree that still stood at the edge of the property. My father and I had planted it when I was 12. It was one of the few things they hadn't cut down, probably because it looked nice in their community brochure. I stood there for a long time, the afternoon sun warming my face, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't about the money. 12 million couldn't replace my father's voice, his hard work, or the years of stress I'd endured. What mattered was the principle, that patience had worked where anger would have failed. If I'd stormed the site, if I'd blocked the roads or destroyed equipment, I'd have been the villain. But instead, I'd waited. I'd let them finish building their empire on my foundation, brick by brick, until the truth was undeniable. People in town started talking about it. Some called me a genius. Others said I was lucky. I don't think it was either. It was just justice taking its time. Even the county sent me a formal apology and quietly fired the clerk responsible for the mapping error. Richard Hill resigned from the HOA not long after that, citing health reasons. The last I heard, he'd moved out of town entirely. As for me, I used a small part of that money to rebuild my father's farmhouse. I didn't change much, kept the same porch, the same red barn, even the same worn-out swing under the oak tree. Every morning I drink my coffee looking out over what's left of my land, the part that still feels like home. The rest, the neighborhood, the houses, are just reminders that patience isn't weakness. It's strategy. Sometimes I drive past Maple Ridge at night. The streetlights glow softly, kids' bikes lie in driveways, and laughter drifts through open windows. I don't feel bitterness anymore. Those people didn't wrong me. They just bought into a dream built on someone else's dirt. I smile and keep driving. I guess that's the thing about justice. It doesn't always arrive in a blaze of glory. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a courtroom, with a single piece of paper that proves everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't tearing someone down. It's letting them build themselves into a corner and then showing them the truth. And if there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that peace doesn't mean surrender. It means knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to let others reveal their own mistakes. My father's voice still echoes in my mind whenever I walk that land. Never stop a fool when he's digging his own hole. He was right. I just never realized how deep that hole could get until 96 homes fell into it. Now, when people ask me what it felt like, watching them build on my land for 2 long years, I tell them it was like watching a storm roll in that you knew would clear the air. Painful, loud, relentless, but necessary. Because after the storm, everything is clean again. That land gave me more than money. It gave me closure. It reminded me that silence can be powerful, that patience can be louder than protest, and that justice, no matter how delayed, is still justice. So I live quietly now, back on my porch, with the wind rustling through the oak leaves and the sound of distant laughter from the neighborhood that unknowingly built my fortune. Every time I look at that skyline of rooftops where my pasture once was, I smile, not out of pride or spite, but gratitude. Because sometimes life doesn't give you the fight you expect. Sometimes it gives you something better, the chance to let time prove you right. And in the end, that's exactly what it did.